Hello, I'm Sally Wiener Grotta, and this is What If, Why Not, How? Where I ask people who have interesting stories and ideas, questions that are on my mind. My guest today is Ellen Kushner. Ellen is the author of the queer fantasy cult classic, Swordspoint, which has been, well, when you talk about it as the book that defined the fantasy of manners subgenre. It's received so much praise from all corners. That includes fellow fantasy authors George R.R. Martin and Neil Gaiman, plus raves from the non-genre world, including the New York Times. How'd you get that one? That's a cool one. From the New York Times, Newsday, and Publishers Weekly. Ellen has written additional Swordspoint books in the world of Riverside. They're called the Riverside books, I believe. And her fans are clamoring for more. Other books include the World Fantasy Award-winning Thomas the Rhymer. Delightful book, by the way, folks. Her short fiction appears regularly in numerous anthologies, and they've been translated, get this, they've been translated into Japanese, French, Dutch, German, Spanish, Latvian, and Finnish. That's incredible. She's also a performer. She's done some wonderful solo stage performances, including Esther, the Feast of Masks, which I rewatched last night, and I still highly recommend it. And it's not just for Purim. The Golden Dreidel, a klezmer Nutcracker for Chanukah, played to sold-out audiences in New York City with Ellen in the role of the magical Tanta Miriam. And we're going to hear more of that in a few moments. And in addition, she has narrated all three of her Riverside novels for Neil Gaiman Presents, winning a 2013 Audie Award. I can't go through everything Ellen has done. She has done and is doing so much. I suggest just Googling her, see some videos, listen to some stories, then do yourself a favor, buy and read or listen to her books. That's Ellen. Yes.
You forgot something kind of important, which is I had my own public radio show for many years, and it was a national series called Sound and Spirit.
And I loved it. And I was going to mention it later, but I'll mention it now. It's Sound and Spirit is one of those magical shows with heartfelt, beautiful prose narrated exquisitely. And that was the first time I saw or heard your interest in Esther, who is an important figure for me too. So we'll be getting into Esther in a few minutes.
Esther was actually created for that radio show. And a lot of what I've done, particularly with Jewish material, comes out of my work in radio.
Yeah.
We're going to pause for a moment while Ellen goes and fetches a hand fan, because it's really hot in here. Excuse me.
Okay.
Ah, yes. Summer in New York City, hot flashes in New York City, and drinking too much tea in New York City.
Yes. I'm avoiding this.
Shelley, thank you so much for having me on your show. This is really great. And we've known each other a while, so I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. It's always fun talking with you and Ellen. Before we start, could you read a bit from your Golden Dreidel to give the audience a taste of it? It's such a wonderful work.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to talking about it with you. And I'm actually reading from the first edition, which has beautiful, beautiful illustrations and cover by a woman named Eileen Wynne Lederer, who's done the most amazing Judaica books that are not for children. And it was very exciting for me to get to have her as my illustrator. But the current edition is done kind of more the way like modern kids' books are done. Mm-hmm. So it's about a girl named Sarah instead of Clara, who gets a magic dreidel at a Chanukah party instead of a Christmas party. And it's a dreidel instead of a nutcracker. And she goes off and has adventures in a magical land. She has just gotten through practically being seduced into being a vain and selfish person by a peacock, when suddenly this crazy guy turns up and insults the peacock and says, now you're the real thing. I can always tell the genuine article. I admire you already, but I'd like to look up to you. There's only one problem. I can't do it from this angle. Any chance you can do a headstand? Sure. But as soon as Sarah stood on her hands, so did the little man. Nope, it's no good, he said, staring into her face. We're still seeing eye to eye. We could stand up. No, wait, I think I've got it. The man reached for his own knee with one hand and fell over, rolling in the dust. Oh, he's got a sock on his head. So his sock got stuck on his ear. Sarah couldn't help it. She laughed. Are you admiring me? He asked. Sarah scrambled to her feet, politely trying to hide her giggles. Not exactly. Good! I'm bringing you pleasure. I'm making you laugh. And that's a lot more important. So let's go. And off they go on their next adventure.
It is a delightful book. I know it's supposed to be a children's book. I know so many adults who are simply enchanted by it. So buy it for your kids and then enjoy it for yourself. I'm curious. Well, I understand the inspiration wanting to make a Jewish Nutcracker, but what is its genesis and which came first, the performance or the book?
It's had two different kinds of, it's like the story that will not die. So what happened first was that we got a grant to do a Chanukah show that was going to be live for a festival in Boston. Mm-hmm. And there was a group I really wanted to work with in Boston, a klezmer group who had already recorded an album called the Klezmer Nutcracker, where they took all of Tchaikovsky's elegant little ballet dances, mm-hmm. but only the sort of ethnic dance ones, and turned them back into ethnic dances. It's absolutely brilliant. You can still hear the album on Spotify and probably everywhere else. The group is called Shirim, which means songs. Shirim Klezmer Orchestra doing Klezmer Nutcracker. So we decided that I was going to do a narrated version of it for which I would write the story. So we decided to flip it and, make it contemporary and about a Jewish family and a Jewish little girl. And then I went ahead and feminized it so that instead of the mysterious uncle who's magical and kind of charismatic, it's a mysterious aunt who's magical and kind of charismatic. And if you are an adult and you know the folklore that I'm drawing on, the fact that she's Tanta Miriam and refers at one point to having sung and played her tambourine while she crossed the Red Sea, it is that Miriam. She's the Miriam the prophetess, and she just happens to be also a colorful auntie with a bag full of presents. And then what I really wanted to do, I was like a big Narnia kid. I loved fantasy, and most of the great fantasy of the 20th century was written very much from an Anglo and Christian point of view. Mm-hmm. So I absolutely loved it. And in my day, there was very little Jewish fantasy and very little fantasy that, had to do specifically with Jewish values and Jewish folklore. So I threw everything I could find at this book. I've got King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Queen of Sheba's black, so that's kind of a nod to, the many Jews of color who have not been sufficiently recognized. I threw in I had to think, who's going to be bad? Who's the bad guy? Well, demons in actually in every Jewish folklore, there are demons. There's got to be somebody who's giving you trouble every day. So I have a demon king who's, because it's for kids, it's slightly comical, big blustering guy. And the fool, who's the person we just met in my reading, is actually my tribute to my dad and his brother growing up in the Bronx in the 1930s and 40s, and that kind of humor that was in the culture then, the New York culture then. Very wise guy, a lot of jokes, a lot of riddles, and also to Danny Kaye, who is in fact Daniel Karanovich, something like that, Kramanics. And I adored Danny Kaye. And that whole vibe, I tried to put that whole vibe into The Fool, so that kids who were not lucky enough to have a babysitter who played, what's it called, the best Danny Kaye movie ever, Court Jester, for them, can still get the Danny Kaye Court Jester vibe.
Yeah. Oh, I always said that Danny Kaye was the one person I would divorce my husband to marry. I just loved him. Absolutely loved him. He's a joy. And if anybody who's watching this hasn't seen The Court Jester, go watch it. It's it's pure charm, and it's humor that doesn't hurt anybody. It was never so insulting or demeaning to another person. And that's what I loved. I mean, it could have cuts. Oh yeah, lots of cuts against the villains and such, but it was never cruel humor. And I loved that.
Kind of a loving satire on the swashbuckling movies of the period. And the villain, who was always Errol Flynn's villain, is played by Basil Rathbone, who is the hottest villain ever, and was in fact a brilliant swordsman. And said when he was doing the sword fight scenes with Danny Kaye, he was terrified.
Well, that of course brings us to Swordspoint. So tell us a little bit about, for those who don't know what Swordspoint is, please share a little bit about what it is and why it is a twist on the traditional.
Well, at this point, I'm embarrassed to say that people consider Swordspoint a cult classic.
Yes.
Because it inspired a couple of generations of writers now. But when I wrote it, nobody had done what I was doing, which was to make two queer men, one of whom is a swordsman and one of whom is, I wouldn't say sidekick, but it's that kind of male buddies. You know, one of them's nice, one of them is difficult, like Butch and Sundance or Sherlock Holmes and Watson. I mean, male buddies who are not sexually involved with each other, but who have that incredible chemistry. And I thought, just once, can they just be sleeping together? So I put them together, and they are, but it's not the point of the book. And it's weird. I've had many people come up and tell me that that book changed their lives, which is a very humbling thing to hear. And many of them said what they loved about it was not that they hadn't read books and fantasy novels, in fact, with gay characters, but in most of them, the gay people were agonizing or doomed. And in my book, it's just a part of the world that they're living in. There's a lot of bisexual characters in all of my Riverside novels. But it started with Swordspoint. It was a very hard book to sell because it's a fantasy with no magic. And it was kind of queer. But that's not the focus of the book. No. And I have to tell you, for years, when I worked in radio, I kind of left fantasy writing for a while, went to work in public radio at WGBH in Boston. And the number of colleagues of mine who read the book because they were friends and they were curious, and then they'd come back to me and go, I don't usually like stuff like this, but this was good. Like, yes, no, it's not all the same. Fantasy is a very, very broad field right now, as you know. Yeah. So I can't believe I got away with publishing it. And it's not like I invented anything, really. It was just I was the first. Other books like that were also more kind of Jane Austen-y than Tolkien-y were just starting to come out then. And that was my generation. It's what we did. But mine, for some reason, had staying power. I probably broke too many rules of fantasy at the time. I mean, at the time, everything was kind of Tolkien. They're going through a forest. They're on a quest. And suddenly I had people in an urban setting, not going through forests. And all of the real danger was not just the swords, but the wit and the outthinking each other. And that was just something waiting to happen, the next step in fantasy. And there are a lot of books like that in the fantasy world now.
There are a lot of books out there, but your characters are so flesh and blood and intriguing and fun that they just carry. I mean, yes, the world is wonderful, but the characters, they are so rich, multidimensional. And you won't see any person defined by a single attribute or two attributes or three attributes. You'll see them as complex human beings. And they are delightful. They are absolutely delightful. Now, to make another switch, because we were talking about Esther, we've discussed that you share my interest in the women of the Hebrew Bible. I just want to take a pause to say they are what we call what authors use the terminology, female archetypes. But they have been societal archetypes wherever Abrahamic religions have taken root, the Christian, Islamic, and Jewish religions. For authors, just to help our audience understand, we use archetypes. Let's say let's say somebody says the name Eve. Immediately, everybody has that picture of a naked woman with an apple and a snake slithering around, and they think about her pivotal role in what Christians call the original sin. That's an archetype. Authors then will build on that using the concept of the innocent being seduced to do something. And, or there'll be authors, the better books, they're subverting the archetype. Just wanted to give that little background because I think we're going to be going a little bit into that. I'm curious, Ellen, when you did the Feasts of Masks, what was it about the archetypes of the biblical Book of Esther that drew you to it? And what you did is a lot of what I'm doing myself. You brought it to the modern world. Why do you think it still is so relevant to our world today that you could have 4 remarkable figures representing the people of the Book of Esther? What is it about that book that does that?
I wouldn't call Esther an archetype. I mean, I think Eve is a big archetype because she has a really important part to play in Christianity, much more so than in Judaism. Jews are not particularly obsessed with Eve and the fall. I don't think, in fact, that Hebrew or Judaism refers to the Eve and Adam thing as the fall.
There's no word. Yeah, the word sin isn't in it.
Picture her. The fact that we picture her with her apple is entirely, I would say, due to Christian art history,
yes,
where the glorious, rich, beautiful centuries of Christian religious art that are rightly recognized as some of the world's great art now, and so we've all seen them. So we get that for Eve. Esther is, I think, a much more obscure figure, which is one reason why she's so wonderful to work with. And the Esther story in particular reads a lot like folklore. Now, as a fantasist, I'm here to tell you that one of the nicest and easiest ways to write a fantasy novel or short story is to pick a fairy tale or a folk tale or even a biblical tale and flesh it out. Because the thing that all of those have in common is that people act, but you don't always know what their motivations are. This is less true in the Bible, where sometimes you'll get a line saying, so-and-so was angry, or, somebody had feelings because of such and such. They're a little more novelistic. In a folktale or a fairy tale, people just do stuff. And you have to go, well, now as a modern narrator, why would they do that? So with Esther, I think the reason that it's not that they're still relevant today, it's that they leave so much space for us to insert ourselves. Mm-hmm. So I looked at the Book of Esther in terms of things around me, and I really decided to focus on the masks aspect of it. But this is also because for the holiday of Purim, which celebrates the deeds of Esther, Jews traditionally just kick it up and wear disguises and wear costumes usually out of the biblical story. Now it's become more that people just dress whatever they want to dress like. But traditionally, the men dress and they do cross-dressing because it's a very transgressive holiday. Mm-hmm. And so the men dress as the women in the story, the women dress as the men in the story. They put on a funny play about it. I mean, it's really, there are those scholars who think, because I've done a lot of work on the notion of a carnival and festival and the reversal of order, that the Jews picked this up when they were maybe in Italy, and the Italians have such a robust tradition of festivals that reverse order in the springtime, and Esther is a springtime festival. So you see what your neighbors are doing, and you go, well, how can we make that Jewish? So they do. I'm sure there's a greater explanation than that, but you can see that cultures intertwine, they steal from each other, they share ideas. So Esther as a feast, it is in fact called the Feast of Masks sometimes in Judaism.
Yes.
But well, what masks does Esther wear? The first one, of course, is that she goes to the big beauty pageant of King Ahasuerus and doesn't say who she is, doesn't say that she's a Jew. Mm-hmm. She happens to be the most gorgeous woman in Persia, so she gets to be the queen. Before her, Queen Vashti is nothing but a mask. We don't talk about what she's like, which again gives a novelist plenty of scope to decide what she's really like. But she's invited to unmask, to take off all her clothes, to show her absolute gorgeousness before the king and all his people. And she refuses to do that. So there's two women dealing with mask issues. And the story goes on. I'm going to stop there because it's been a while since I've done the show and I don't want to screw up my other two. But you get the idea that it's all about people disguising who they are. And then, I know. Yeah. The next one is, so in my show, I decided, again, to globalize it. And so the woman who is passing when she marries a rich man is a Black woman who has decided to pass for white because she's got fair skin. And there are a number of Black women who have written in the last few decades about discovering that they have an aunt or a great aunt somewhere who left the family to pass for white and succeeded. So I thought, what a wonderful story to be able to tell. So that's one of the characters that I embody when I do Esther, the Feast of Masks. The other one is a gay teen. I had it be a boy because it would be fun, who's passing as not gay. And one of them is, and then the theme of genocide comes in, because in the Book of Esther, Haman, the bad guy, may his name be forgotten, is going to literally obliterate all the Jews. He doesn't just want to kill a few. He wants to make sure there's not a Jew left in the land.
Right.
And so for that, a friend of mine whose brother had been a cameraman on an investigation in Rwanda said, let him tell you his story and then make a story out of that. That the Tutsi and the Hutu and the Tutsi, one of them was literally trying to obliterate the other.
Yes.
And the genocide in Rwanda is a horrific story. And it's what Haman was trying to do. So I used that as well.
It was interesting that you used the concept that was being used, that was saying, I think it was the Hutu was saying the Tutsi were cockroaches and you have to squash them. That's what is done throughout all time, universally, where you have to first either both demonize and animalize, turn the other into an animal rather than a human being, because then it's okay.
You have to dehumanize people in order to think it's okay to kill them. It's a standard.
Right. Yeah.
And it's you get a fat anytime a leader comes along and starts referring to any member of the country as being animal-like, naming no names.
Yeah, exactly. So it was. There's a lot of poignancy in your play, but what I find fascinating is we were talking about the holes in the biblical stories. That there are so many holes, especially about the stories of the women of the Bible. There's very, very little motivation shown. It's all surface for the women, and by just number of words, it's a very small portion of the Bible, which is why I find it such a rich thing for discussion and for fiction and for essays and everything. I've just gone wild with it. I'm wondering, now, most of your work has been, or at least what you're known for mostly, is non-Jewish work. Have you drawn on any other women or people of the Bible for your work, either intentionally or perhaps unconsciously, that you notice it only after you've written the story? Are there, is there influence from your heritage that is...
Oh, well, my heritage, yes. The Bible, no. Okay. I mean, look, to be a decent fantasy writer, you have to be writing about reality at some level or other.
Yes.
And you have to draw it out of your own self and your own heart. Mm-hmm. And I'm a Jewish woman who comes from a pretty observant Jewish family. I'm the granddaughter of 4 immigrants, and I heard the stories from my grandparents. Thank God nobody was a Holocaust. They all get out before the Holocaust. They were the generation before the Holocaust. So I don't have that on my head. But, I have a very rich immigrant Jewish heritage and a very rich Jewish, upbringing. So of course that's part of my books. You won't know it unless you really dig. And I'm only starting to realize what I put in, because I felt sort of bad, like, why aren't I making things more Jewish? I realized that there's a family at the heart of all the Swordspoint books, a family that's part of the nobility. And one of the characters, and so the books don't follow in rapid succession. They take place at different times in the life of a couple of characters that I start up in the first book. And the noble family has a lot of rebels in it. But they're always being told, you have to uphold the traditions of the family. You have responsibilities as a member of this great house. And I realized a few years ago, oh, you're talking about being Jewish. It's not, but there is a way in which we think of ourselves as aristocrats. My family was very educated in the old country and then came to America and had to, do the same kind of labor as everybody else. Just as immigrants do now, you can be as educated as you want back home. If you don't speak the language and you don't have the credentials, there you go. But my father's mother and my grandmother never let anybody forget that she was an educated woman, even though she was at the bottom of the rung when she came to America. So I got a little bit of that sense of, we are special. We are not like everybody. But also just that sense as a Jew that you have responsibilities to the world and to your family. I get this very much from my mother, that I owe the generations before me. I don't know if, look, I've known a lot of people from a lot of different cultures and a lot of different backgrounds, and some have this and some don't. But for my mother, it was very much bound up in being Jewish, that your ancestors had been martyred, that your ancestors had made sacrifices, and that you had this immensely rich tradition that went back for generations and for centuries, and you were not throwing that out.
Yeah.
And that's it's a little something around your neck. It can be a necklace around your neck, but it's something you carry. And I think in some ways that's the emotional place that I have put some of my characters in the Swordspoint books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's also the Tikkun Olam, the responsibility for the future to try to do good, try to fix the world, that you can't just be living in yourself, that you're living in the world, and you're part of the world.
When I was doing my radio show, I kept talking about these mystic and very judgmental things coming in other religions, and I had to say to my boss, who I was doing my scripts with, Jews don't really care about this and this. Jews care about this. Look, how do you treat other people? That I don't know if I would say that. I mean, there are some wonderful stories about the future, but it's really, as a Jew, most of your responsibility, I hate to say it, Sally, but is to the here and now. Yes. How do you treat your family? How do you treat somebody you cross in the street? How do you treat your business associates? That is really what's going to get you praise or in trouble in Jewish tradition.
Yeah. As Rabbi Peg Kirschenbaum says, Judaism doesn't tell you what to believe; it tells you how to behave.
There you go. That's exactly it.
And it's an important. I think it's an important distinction. That's why I feel that the fixing the world, repairing the world, is such an important concept. It's dealing with the everyday relationships, and that's how you can repair the world.
Well, it's not even repair the world, it's just don't make it worse. Make it a little bit better. I mean, the great work of repairing the world, I was just reading that it's a kind of a modern,
yes,
a very contemporary way of engaging with Judaism. Yes. I don't think my grandparents in Russia were really worrying about Tikkun Olam. They had a bunch of rules to follow, and they had a bunch of neighbors to deal with. Tikkun Olam is something, in a way, that we're privileged to have as contemporary Western people. Yes. We've got a lot already, and now what do we do with that?
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. In fact, I just wrote that in an essay last night about it being a modern concept. That it is, it's inherent.
It's an old concept, but it's one that we've brought to the fore now because
it's become a pillar of modern Judaism, a very important pillar of modern Judaism.
But I would say not as. I mean, I'm curious. I don't know. Well, I know modern Orthodox here in New York who are pretty hip, but I wonder if the more traditional Orthodox, if that's on their radar, or if that's just something cool liberal Jews can do. I don't know. I mean, it's a great concept, and it's not like someone just invented it. I mean, one of the lovely things about a tradition as old as Judaism is you can pick pretty much anything you want. out of the tradition. There's, thousands of pages of track.
Well, that's
and we kind of pick and choose what suits our need at the current moment.
well, hasn't that been what scholars and rabbis have done for millennia?
Absolutely.
They argue these fine points of the Torah and the Tanakh of the Bible, and they go back and forth, and they keep records of the disagreements, because the disagreement, the other side might have been right after all, but it was picking and choosing what they would what they wanted to live by for each generation, and which is why we get to do it for ourselves now.
Exactly. And I will say something slightly heretical, which is that fairy tales are the same. I always say each generation gets the fairy tales it deserves. I mean, if you look at the way fairy tales were presented in the 50s, the men had just come back from the war, they wanted the women to be feminine and delicate and go back in the kitchen. Cinderella and all of the kind of well-known Disney heroines were, dainty and domestic and not real pushy. And it just kills me that that's what people think fairy tales are, because if you read the actual original folk versions of them, even Cinderella is dealing with a dead mother and a whole lot of blood. And a lot of the fairy tale heroines are extremely feisty and kind of transgressive. So those are the ones that in the 80s and 90s, people like Jane Yolen were doing retellings of. We really, that it just as with any archetypal story, if you will, we pull and transform it to what we need it to be at the time.
Absolutely.
Material is the same, but how we use it is different.
You can tell the same story over and over again, and it will be a different story if we're lucky, when we're lucky.
When we're lucky. I mean, the devil croaked scripture to suit his needs.
I hesitate, but I think we can't ignore the elephant in the room. Has the current significant rise in anti-Semitism affected your work in any way? Or I know it's affected mine tremendously. Like, I am leaning more heavily. I'm leaning more heavily into saying I am a Jew and this is what it's about. I get feisty, I get angry, and so I go, okay, guys, you don't like it, this is who I am. But I have friends who are avoiding certain topics because they're a little bit afraid.
Well, what platform are you talking about? Are you talking about your fiction or essays or Facebook?
Yes, all of the above. All of the above. I have associates in writing, fiction, nonfiction, essays, whatever it is, that are very concerned. And there are some that are avoiding and trying to be like Esther and Heidi.
Yeah, or just keep your head down. I mean, look, the fact is, with social media, if you don't keep your head down, you are absolutely opening yourself up to a huge amount of judgment. And it's interesting, I mean, to go back, maybe 10 years back. So I am a bisexual. I married a woman. We've been together 30 years now, the author and educator Delia Sherman. And I adore her, and we have become kind of a glamour lesbian couple. And so I've been out about that for a very long time. And in the science fiction and fantasy world, they love it. They celebrate diversity. And so that's been super cool. What I haven't talked much about in the earlier past was being a Jew. So about 10 years ago, I started thinking, I want to be out as a Jew as well as a lesbian, bisexual person. I don't want to kind of hide my Judaism. So occasionally I would make a reference to it. Of course, when I did the Golden Dreidel, that gave me, more material to talk about. But it's funny to think how easy it was to just ignore that and how it was a choice of mine. But it was not at the time a controversial choice. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to October 2023, and the slaughter took place the day after my birthday. That was in Paris, where we live part of the year. And I sat tight for a while. Then I started reposting some things that some of my lefty Israeli friends were saying, both the ones in Israel and the ones in America, because they were lefty enough not to scare the people who were not going to be, Israel, rah, rah, rah. And a lot of people found that really helpful, because a lot of people see, Judaism or even Israel as a monolith, which it isn't. And as things went, but what I was doing was trading in on the fact that I have been a member of a beloved minority for a long time, and in my community, obviously not everywhere, and that I have built up a very strong presence on Twitter to some extent, but very much on Facebook, that I have real relationship with people there. I actually think myself sometimes as their rabbi, because we talk about issues like, women in domestic violence, which I'm glad to say I haven't had, but a number of my friends have. I've learned a lot, about all kinds of abuse and just difficulty feeling okay with being yourself, which is in some ways a more benign kind of violence. And so I talk about those issues a lot. I support a lot of people in my community who have found me on Facebook. I try to be a very, very inclusive and non-threatening place to talk about things. And I'm astonished how respectful people are, not just to me, but to each other. People look at me and go, God, like nobody's an asshole on your feed. Like, yeah, I know, it's pretty great. I have to say I learned some of that when I was doing Sound and Spirit, my radio show, which was about religion and cultural traditions. And I really had to find language and attitudes to be super inclusive and super non-judgmental. So I kind of have carried that forward on my Facebook feed. And I thought, okay, I'm going to cash in on some of the goodwill that I've earned from these people. And so I put things up. I think I have virtually never said anything myself. What I do is repeat things that I think are repeating from other people. I'm not much of a nonfiction writer, to be honest. I like the mask of fiction. So I just kept posting things or occasionally gently saying something to somebody. Mm-hmm. And I'm absolutely astonished that I didn't get attacked more. So I suppose it's a combination of being able to read the room, knowing my audience, and people not wanting to kick some old gay lady. I don't know.
Well, I think also you are so respected. And so the people who follow you for a reason.
And I think there are people who probably hated what I had to say, but rather than attack me, they just lost their heads.
Yeah. So are you willing to share with us what you're working on now?
Oh, am I ever? I'm working on being very patient while publishers try to decide whether they want to buy my next novel. So it took me a very long time to write this novel, which is about the bastard daughter of one of the Swordspoint characters who is the angriest teenager in the world. So she's born into this family of obligation and eccentricity, and it's how she deals with the family and how the family deals with her. And a great time dealing with that, but I had to rewrite, partly because I wasn't willing to let enough of my anger into her. I kind of had to let my anger into that character in order to make the thing work. Mm-hmm. And I thought I was finished with the novel. And then my emergency writing group, which is some of the really great fantasy writers of our generation who've been friends of mine for a long time. Holly Black, Kelly Link, Cassandra Clare, Delia Sherman, Terry Windling. Terry did not say this, but the rest of them did. I sat down with them and they said, you need the grown-ups to be in the story too. You need a point of view from the grown-ups, not just from the kid. And so I went back and spent a year rewriting it so that they were the grown-ups' point of views as well. I mean, you get their point of view in scenes with them, but you didn't get their actual point of view. You didn't get them having their own, as it were, grown-up adventure with what's going on in this book. So I did all that. And I turned it into my agent, and it was just the first half of the novel because we were going to send it out we're just going to send out the first half. And, if somebody wants to buy it, they will. But by the time I had added the grown-ups and the anger and the extra characters, it was book length. And so we've only sent out the first half, and I hope that it will be published as book one of a 2-book series. Because I don't think I can wait any longer. I've been doing a lot of things, as you said. I've been doing audiobooks, and I've been doing, the Klezmer Nutcracker was a performance piece, and then it was a radio show, and then it was a book, and then it was a play in New York City, a kids' play in which I played the character of the aunt. And so it's had a lot of time to it. And that was my big appearance in New York as an actor, was playing Tanta Miriam for Vital Children's Theater, the Klezmer Nutcracker. So I've been doing a lot, but it took me a while to get another novel. So I finally turned it into my agent. It's out at a bunch of publishing houses, and we'll see who's the lucky winner. But meanwhile, I'm writing book 2. I mean, I had already begun book 2 for the second half.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it when it's published, because I have absolute faith it will be. So, with all you've done creatively, do you have a guiding principle or suggestion for aspiring writers or performers that you would want to share as your last?
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to come from here. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to please the market. I mean, don't be an idiot, but you got to tell your truth.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that's going to make a difference. And that's the thing that's going to set you apart from everybody else. Mm-hmm. And particularly if you're working in the fantasy field, C.S. Lewis, whatever you may think of his, Christian apologism, is really writing from the heart about what he thinks the world is like or should be like. Mm-hmm. J.R.R. Tolkien, the same thing. Ursula Vernon, the same thing. Holly Black, the same thing. It's really coming from a place of deep conviction. And you can tell when a fantasy novel is not coming from a place of deep conviction, but is simply trying to make everybody happy. And in fact, one of the reasons I've had to rewrite some of the stuff I've had to rewrite was because I needed to go deeper. Yeah. Sometimes the deep conviction comes right out immediately, and sometimes you have to challenge yourself to go a little bit deeper. And as a performer, same thing. You've got to be genuine. You've got to be genuine.
That's the hardest thing.
They can smell it, and it appeals to people a lot.
Yeah. It's a very, very good advice, not just for fantasy writers or performers. It's true. It's bleeding on the keyboard, telling your truth.
But then you got to clean up the blood and make it look nice. I mean, that's the second half, which is to everybody.
Well, that's the editing.
Writing is rewriting. Writing is rewriting. And I teach. I'm going this summer to teach at Holland's University summer program in children's literature. And I'm like, do not ever be mad at yourself because your first draft is lousy. Your first draft is supposed to be lousy. That's why God gave us rewriting.
Yeah. Oh, I'm on like my nth rewrite right now. And it's like, and that's actually the sculptural aspect of writing. That's when you get to really work it and make it into something that's beautiful rather than just your own personal story. Which is
bleed on the keyboard and then clean up the blood.
Yeah, right, exactly. Thank you so much, Ellen. It's been a delight. My guest today was Ellen Kushner, author, raconteur, bon vivant. In addition,
you want my recipe for coffee? For chocolate?
No, I want Delia's recipes for a number of things. I see pictures of her food, and I want that. In addition to her Riverside books and stories, you have the Thomas the Rhymer, which is the award winner. You have Golden Dreidel, which you're going to love reading that for yourself as well as for the kids. You can connect with her on her website, ellenkushner.com, as well as on Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. As for me, my 2 newest books are Of Being Woman, a feminist science fiction collection from Noble Fusion Press, and Daughters of Eve from Buy It Publishing, which is a essay-based discussion workbook and journaling guide for exploring the nature of our lives today through the lens of the stories of the women of the Hebrew Bible, such as Esther, Sarah, Hagar, and so forth. My website is SallyWienerGrotta.com. My videos are also on my website as well as on YouTube, and connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, sometimes on Blue Sky. I'm still trying to figure out Blue Sky. And if you want to stay in touch with me and read about my adventures and really connect, sign up for my newsletter. I don't send it out that often, but it's always full of all kinds of stuff. And there's a sign up on my website. Thank you for joining us. And thank you so much, Ellen. And give my warmest to Delia.
Thank you so much. I will. And thank you so much for inviting me to do this. It's been really good.
It's been a delight.